Alrighty, folks. Welcome back to episode 2 of season 3 of Cookie Pocket. We made it to 3 seasons. How about them apples? I am Zach, and I'm joined by Christian and Mitchell, the usual co-host. And today we are talking about an Italian film. But it's not an Italian horror film, so you might not get the bitter divide that you're expecting this episode. Today we're talking about classic spaghetti western, A Fistful of Dollars, directed by Sergio Leone. It's a pretty familiar Western concept at this point. It's essentially a remake of Yojimbo, an equally classic samurai film. But in this film, Clint Eastwood, also known as the Man with No Name, although in this movie he does have a name, it's Joe, wanders...
Joe, who's that?
I don't know. He has no last name. Maybe that's the no name. Anyhow, he wanders into this town where there's a long-lasting rivalry between these two sort of clans, the Baxters and the Rojos, and he decides to play that rivalry to his advantage until it reaches a point where he has to take a side and stand up for the town. He won't take anymore. And a great degree of action and gunfightery ensues. And it's a good deal of fun. So why don't we open, as we usually do, with overall thoughts. What did you guys think of A Fistful of Dollars?
I'll go first, Christian. Get your hand off your chin with your brain doing stuff. I really enjoyed this. I kind of knew mostly what I was expecting. I'm not a Kurosawa fan quite yet, but I'm getting there. Maybe that'll be my cinema tour.
Oh,
maybe we'll talk about that. That would be interesting. Somehow this is in the Godzilla universe now. So
what?
Because of Toho. Toho somehow involved in this. So there you go. Yes. Anyway, this was very clever and tightly filmed, and that is basically summarizes all of my thoughts. It is very small scale. The close-up shots are very engaging and really kind of bring you into the environment, and it's very immersive. Even though there are a lot of moments where it feels low budget, because it is, I definitely think that the gunfights and the actual filming of the action and leading up to the action, and then that kind of the falling action. Wow, falling action of every scene that involves shooting. And I really enjoy those moments the most. I do agree with what Christian said in his review about the dubbing. That's just something you have to get used to, obviously, and that's like spaghetti western cliche. But I really enjoy those aspects of this. This is definitely not like John Wayne. This is a very counterculture kind of thing. This is kind of shoving it in everyone's face, saying like this is how it really was kind of attitude. And I think it really pays off in a lot of ways. It's definitely rough around the edges. The plot for me was difficult to follow, even though it was simple, and I feel like that's a problem. But I don't totally like that could have been something that could have been fixed, because I know this is like a shot in the dark in a lot of different ways when it comes to kind of building up that plot, and also kind of keeping everything cohesive when it comes to the spacing out the action and everything, and just a lot of working parts that the director has to really deal with. And I feel like for how original this was, with the exception of the derivative story, the style is heavily original, and I feel like that is praiseworthy in more ways than one. So 3.5 out of 5 for me is pretty good.
Yeah, totally. I feel like with something like this, even if you personally on some level or another don't enjoy it, you have to give it like at least a 3, just out of respect for like how important it is to everything that came after it. Yes, excuse me, the dubbing is always going to be a thing for me. It just is. But you know, I at the same time, like, I think it's kind of neat that you have like all of these actors with different language constraints and backgrounds, and they're all like playing a character in the way that is like purest to them. And I can totally like respect that and value that in some way, even though I think the dubbing is distracting and less ideal than if they were all just speaking the same language. But whatever. when I saw Yojimbo for the first time, I was actually modestly underwhelmed for the same reasons Mitchell cited about this one. I do think the plot's kind of tricky. Despite how allegorical it is, you've got like this sort of like anti-hero type main character of sorts where, I mean, he's clearly like the good guy of the story, but you don't really know where his interest lies or who he's loyal to, if anyone. And there's like, you get this sense of warring factions, but it's not, to me at least, it's not extremely evident like which is good, or at least for like the first half of the film. And so, you know, I get that. I think my review for Yojimbo was like 4 out of 5 stars, but then I just said I was disappointed because I had seen so many Kurosawas before then that just blew my mind. But I actually think this setting makes slightly more sense for the plot than Yojimbo's setting, because there's a lot of like, especially in Kurosawa's other stuff like Seven Samurai and Hidden Fortress, there's like a ton of honor inherent in a samurai character, which in my opinion doesn't really leave a ton of space for the anti-hero thing, especially if you'd seen like Toshiro in Hidden Fortress. He's playing like very much an Obi-Wan type character, which is totally not what he's doing in Yojimbo. And in this, you've got Clint Eastwood like basically like playing cowboy Boba Fett or something. I'm sorry, Zach, I had to say it at some point. And it's awesome. It's freaking great. I think he's like the perfect protagonist for this and the perfect performer. And it's so impressionable. And the colors and the sound and everything really, really works together. The more I'm talking about this, I feel like I should have given this a 4 instead of a 3.5. Maybe I'll up it. But I really liked it. I'm so glad this exists because I really love a lot of the things that it has informed that came after it. And I think aesthetically and technically, like thinking back to when we talked about The Curse of Frankenstein, I give that a 4 because I think it worked perfectly within the confines of its production. And I think this does something quite similar. So I gave it a 3.5. I'm sort of convincing myself that it might need to be a 4, but it's, you know, definitely deserves to be a classic.
Yeah. Well, all right. But based on your descriptions, it sounds like you guys, and especially Christian, might have enjoyed this particular plate of spaghetti, maybe even a little more than I did.
Yeah.
Because I enjoyed this quite a bit. I do like this a lot. But I do think it, like Mitchell mentioned, it's very rough around the edges. You can really tell that they had maybe like one set that happened to be out in the middle of the desert, and they had like one costume per character. It's a very efficient movie. It's the kind of thing that you would make if it was like, we have this wardrobe of costumes and this set in the out in the desert. What can we make? And I think it performs really well within those limitations, but those limitations are still there. And I think especially in the context of later spaghetti westerns that Leone made, that really go all out and are way bigger and I think a lot more impressive than this sort of does pale a little. That's not to say it's bad by any means. I think a lot of sequences in this are really good, and even though I noted in my review that Leone's style isn't quite fully formed here yet, I think it really works for a lot of sequences. I mean, one of my favorite Western sequences, like overall, is probably the I don't think it's nice, you laughing, like initial gunfight scene. Which I think is played so well, especially in contrast to a lot of like American Westerns that came out previous to that. It's 3 out of 5 for me. I think it's a good, solid movie, but I don't think it ascends to the great that other spaghetti Westerns do. We all, in our reviews, or even just here, noted Ennio Morricone's score at some point. Yes. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Do we have any thoughts on that? How do we think it plays within the film? How do we think it plays within, like, in terms of its impact on other scores that we might have heard in other movies?
I don't think it's overplayed at all. I think it's pretty universally accepted that this, like, you could hear this 15 different ways and it would still, it's just such a tone-setting score. It really, the tone would not be there without the score. And I know that's, like, really high praise, but I mean, just it feels cheap. It feels gritty, but it feels cheap when you don't have that just lingering in the background, and at the very least, just giving you little flute intro or whatever. That's a flute, right? Yeah. I'm not crazy. All right, I know stuff. And I just I mean, you do get used to it after a bit, but I mean, it works well with the way that it was integrated. And I know that's very vague, but music theory 101 right now. But it's not like the Batman. It's not like the Batman where it's something in the way is played very slightly differently, but it's still the same riff, right?
Yeah.
Like in this, there are the same riffs, but they're like played by different instruments, and it's just the way that, I don't know. It's just really well integrated. I mean, there's not a lot I could really complain about, and it's very easy to not forget. So.
Yeah, it's awesome. Excuse me. Still dealing with a bit of that residual cough. I really like the Batman score. I think it does what it needs to do.
Yeah.
But anyway,
yes.
Back to this. It's fantastic. I almost mentioned in my review how much I liked the opening credits. Like it's fantastic. You just have like this, like I guess like trumpet ensemble or something, like playing like the main theme, which is elaborated on later, and sort of that motif is brought back in other songs, and you've got like these silhouettes of people like riding horses and like shooting each other, and you're like, yeah, this is great. And
a lot of totally like to later shots in the film. Like it's a great little like two-dimensional form of foreshadowing almost.
Yeah, totally. It brings you right into the setting and the feel of what's to come. And I mean, usually, especially with a film from like the 60s, opening credits is like a dreary long list of names and like sort of like a maybe like a distant orchestral song that plays for like 90 seconds. And this is just like it just got me in the zone. And I had like some marginal fear that I wouldn't like this because the dubbing or whatever, my extreme distaste for things like Suspiria, which we discussed in a prior episode, if you want to give that a try. But I was in, man. I was totally in. And I think that really starts with the music and the sound, like the same way that it does with something like Star Wars, because I think like a viewer may not even be aware of it, but that is like the first thing that like sensually you key into, because you hear that and that just like that affects you in like a passive but automatic way that sometimes your vision or your varying level of attention doesn't. So I think it's perfect for the film.
Yeah, I think Ennio Morricone is a composer who did work like from the 50s and 60s up until like the 2000s. His scores like continue to appear in things. Like he did the score for The Hateful Eight, and it works perfectly there. And I think in the same way, his score here is sort of timeless and even kind of ahead of the film in a lot of places. I think in some scenes, the score in this does maybe a better job communicating what's meant to be happening than the actual content of the scene. Like there's a moment where Joe, that feels so, where Clint Eastwood is holding the he's basically holding the wife of the head of the Baxters. He's holding his wife hostage upstairs, basically, or he's using her to bring him upstairs. And there's this like really tense piece going on in the background, really tense piece of music, and I felt like listening to it, I was like, is this from like a newer movie? And I'm listening to like a version of this film that's had like the soundtrack edited, because it feels so current, and it feels like a piece you could drop right into a movie today and it would still work, which I think a lot of the camera work in this, in some of those more mundane scenes, maybe doesn't have that same timelessness to it. And I think, the score is fabulous. The score is really effective. But I think at the same time, Leone also knows where to not use score. Like the final gunfight in this is almost entirely without music. And I think that really works and is really striking and lends to the severity of the moment, because all the tension is built up within you and by the images on screen, and you don't maybe need the assistance of the soundtrack that was being lent in like that first gunfight, for instance, the My Mule Don't Like You Laughing gunfight. We've come back to the dubbing a couple of times, so I want to go on to another sound point. I want to address the dubbing. I think we've all said that it's distracting in this, but I want to compare it to some of the previous Italian films that we've watched, so things like Suspiria and Zombie 2, which was a non-Cookie Pocket watch. And I want to just talk about the dubbing in this as compared to the dubbing in those. And do we think it's less distracting here, equally distracting, but the film makes up for it? What are the thoughts on that?
I mean, it's hard for me to answer this question honestly, because I really do watch like so many things now, and even Suspiria was like a year ago basically at this point. So it's truly hard for me to remember. I guess I would say it's slightly less distracting here just by virtue of our main character not everyone is dubbed. Clint Eastwood did have to dub himself, but it's fairly seamless with him because he's also speaking English in the footage. So I think that's probably like the main thing that makes it less distracting than the other two. But also, I just think the performances are better here in general. Okay. I think basically everything about this is just better to me. I'm sorry, Zach.
I also feel like in a Western, especially in one of these like earlier Westerns, archetypes are much easier to decipher. So even I feel like Suspiria, for example, is a lot more ambitious, I'll say, in that sense. Because the characters do feel very individualistic. I don't feel like I'm comparing them to other characters in other horror films. But in this, I mean, obviously this is one of the OGs, but like, a lot of later films, you can think of other characters that would be very similar. So I feel like I already have it in my head who those characters are, and I don't really feel like they need to say very much for them to kind of prove to me how they fit into the story. So in that, I feel like their dialogue is a lot less like influential in my opinion of them, I guess, but or how they come across to the viewer, and I feel like that in and of itself helps save a little bit of the weirdness when it comes to the dubbing and even some of the lackluster writing. Like the oh my gosh, the Spanish thing. What was he saying about the what we say about the proverb, the Spanish proverb?
Oh.
And I was like, that was the worst. Like I was like, but I was by that point I was already convinced of that character's like standing and his authority and everything, and I felt like he was a genuinely like impactful villain. Like we saw later on, obviously I would have just chilled in that burning house, by the way. I would have been like, I hear all that's going on outside, I'm not going out there. But
maybe there's a back door.
Yeah, there's a back door, right. But yeah, by that in that sense, the dubbing was not that big of a deal for me here, but
I'll just add real quick, Zach. At some point I also made the conscious decision to like stop looking at the actors' mouths as much as possible, because I knew I could get more out of their performances if I didn't scrutinize that. And they're like, all of these actors are doing a lot of work with their eyes and the rest of their like physical body language. So I mean, there are ways around it. The same way you wouldn't be necessarily like reading subtitles like a book on a film with subtitles. You want to like reference, you want to visually reference as much as possible. So maybe as a viewer, I'm just giving this a better go perhaps than I did Suspiria.
Maybe. And the most memorable shots are the close-ups. Like the close-ups pretty much make the cinematography for me. There's only a select couple moments where I would say like maybe a wider shot would have been better, but.
You do make a good point though, Mitchell, that I maybe hadn't considered, which is that the archetypical nature of a lot of these characters makes it maybe a little easier to decipher the meaning in their lines and their movements, and so much of the action in this happens without dialogue. Like you pointed out, there's close-ups where you'll see maybe a character glance to another character, and that's the action of the scene, but so much is communicated through that look of uncertainty or cockiness or something along those lines. But I do think, I mean, Eastwood is playing a very archetypal role here. Sergio Leone reportedly said, we like a lot of the emotion of the character was in how we filmed him and how we lit him, because at the time Clint had two expressions, hat and no hat. But I think for the most part, I think the dubbing works here maybe better than it does in Suspiria, even though the lead character in Suspiria was played by an American actress. So that like logically the line should sync up pretty well with her as well.
But he ain't no Clint.
I think we see a little snippet of maybe the worse side of Italian dubbing with Jesus. who is dubbed by like a 30-year-old woman doing a baby voice.
I love Jesus though.
The worst thing. Just the worst thing ever.
It's the best thing. It's the best thing ever.
It takes you all the way out of the movie, in my opinion. It reminds me of, there's an Italian movie called The House by the Cemetery, where the lead character is this little boy named Bob, who's like 3 years old, and he's voiced by like a 40-year-old woman. So kids in Italian movies are always kind of especially with the dubbing. But I think that's kind of the only weak link here. But that kind of takes us to the end of like my questions I had set aside. I did want to ask you guys before we go to final thoughts though. This film, as we pointed out, was mostly made by an Italian cast and crew in Spain. This movie was not filmed in America at all. So I wanted to ask you guys, do you think that shows? Does this feel inauthentically Western to you guys?
No, and kind of what you were saying about the efficiency of how everything was filmed, like the second I felt like it was starting to get, the budget was really showing, is the wider the camera panned out. Like literally that was it for me. Like the wider it got, the more that was being shown, the less self-contained I felt like the film was. Mm-hmm. And I do think that, you know, but budget aside, I feel like those closed-in moments and those moments where that are really defined by the characters and their exact emotions and the specific actions they're doing are like the best parts of the film. And I don't feel, I mean combined with the score and just the authenticity, or I guess the perceived authenticity of the time period mm-hmm. that was kind of trying to be achieved. Not to mention, like, you know, just the general like gangs and the Mexican soldiers and all that, and the guns, and as we'll talk about, are all. I feel like it's authentic enough and closed in enough most of the time where I don't feel like it's not in the U.S. or at least on the U.S.-Mexican border. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, questions like these always, I wouldn't have known if you hadn't told me. So okay. I feel like inauthenticity, whatever. Like I know
desert's a desert, man.
Yeah, like I don't think it's really noticeable if Tatooine was shot in Jordan or Tunisia, depending on the movie. Like,
no, that's Tatooine for real.
yeah, they flew there.
Yep.
No, I mean it's fine. You know, I think it totally works. I don't really think setting is that important, honestly, in terms of like mm-hmm. whatever, like Spain, Italy, U.S. specificity. Mm-hmm. I just think, you know, it's like Western-ish setting, and that's kind of all that matters to me, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that this is authentic to the Western genre of the time, but at the same time, I don't think it's trying to be. I think it is trying to be maybe a more realistic portrayal of the West and sort of trying to reinvent the Western in contrast to what American studios were doing at the time. Especially since so many American Westerns, everybody's very chipper, everybody's very happy. You've got the white hats and the black hats, cowboys and Indians, that kind of thing, village fairs. It's a very optimistic portrayal of the West, and here, everybody is shooting each other. Everybody is so sweaty, especially in that final fight. Ramon is like dripping with sweat, and it's everything's very grimy, and it feels very. I'm not gonna say it feels very real, but it feels very kind of dirty and unpleasant, and a lot closer to what the West probably was like. Interestingly, Clint Eastwood sort of made his character in this movie from the ground up. Like, he bought a lot of the costume items himself. He worked on the show Gunsmoke as like an extra and a guest actor every now and then. And he bought props from the show to bring onto the set. And he and Sergio Leone decided, hey, why don't we give you a poncho? I don't know, it looks different. And I think that it's sort of like by chance that they made this really iconic character who's so different from other Western heroes but fits into this genre so well and has sort of become like the archetype of that kind of hero. I mean, you mentioned like Boba Fett, who I think falls into this sort of a character. And I think The Mandalorian, from what I've heard at least, like follows in those kind of footsteps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think this is a real kind of icon in the making, and sort of entirely by accident. Apparently, Clint Eastwood doesn't even smoke. He just decided if I have a bitter taste in my mouth on set, it'll help me kind of get into character. So that was a character choice, I guess. But yeah, all right. Now I am ready for final thoughts, or I guess we're ready for final thoughts. So is there anything we didn't mention you guys wanted to bring up? Any final thoughts you had before we move on to our other segments?
I feel like how reserved Clint Eastwood's character is compared to later films, especially after watching Dirty Harry. Like, every time they have Clint Eastwood on the screen, they're like, just do the most you can be. and he just goes crazy. And this totally feels authentic to me for him. And I feel like they really could have not, I mean, it's hard to even say they could have chosen anybody else. I mean, he is him. So, I mean, there's not much else to say about that, but just by the fact that like half of this movie is pretty much carried by the fact that that's Clint Eastwood. And, I don't think anything could really be replicated in the same way.
Yeah. This was his first lead role, actually. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mitchell. I keep going back to Star Wars for my examples. I hate how one-dimensional it is me. But like, I don't think Harrison Ford was a prodigious actor in A New Hope, but it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. He does a lot of like the whole like the pointing thing, and
yeah.
I gotta be honest. When I looked up, I was really hoping that for a few dollars more was a remake of Sanjuro, and I was a little disappointed that it's not. But this is great. I actually think the plot suits this setting a little bit better than Yojimbo's setting. I am very glad that I can like reference this. Like I as like a growing cinephile of sorts, I'm thankful that this was one of your choices for this season, Zach. Right. I'm excited to talk more about Kurosawa in the future. And yeah, this is a cracking good time. And if you're, I would say to our viewers, if you're drawn to like any of the sort of genre types implicated here, that it's probably worth a try.
Yeah. Mine are not summary final thoughts, but something I did notice while watching my last marvelous cinema tour film, Iron Man, was just a testament to the influence of this movie. There's a shot in the cave sequence where Tony Stark is hammering out the mask to his first suit. And he has one hand down his side, gripping the suit, and the other using the hammer. And it's the exact same composition as Clint Eastwood in the mine, one hand at his side, testing the the steel oven that he does in this film. And both are sequences where our previously cocky hero has been humiliated and is recovering in a cave while looked after by a bald, bearded man. So the lasting influence of A Fistful of Dollars remains strong. All right, so let's move our way on then to The Week in Review. This is a segment we added last season where we talk about things that we've been watching or reading or listening to or really whatever since our last episode. So guys, what you been up to?
Well, I've been up to a free trial on AMC Plus in order to watch A Fistful of Dollars, and I'm taking full advantage of it while I have it. I've watched 3 other things on AMC Plus in that time. Let's see. Hannah Takes the Stairs, a 2007 mumblecore film starring Greta Gerwig. And in my review, I called it more of an interesting exercise in form than a film unto itself. It's just like constant shaky cam. It feels like home footage, and there's clearly like a ton of like improvised dialogue. And at some point, it's just trying so hard to be like different and real that it is like distinctly not real to me, at least. So I give that a 2. I saw 21 Jump Street, which was freaking hilarious. I think Jonah Hill deserves a lot more hype than he gets right now. I really think he's like one of the funniest in the biz right now. And he really works well with Channing Tatum in that one. Excited for the sequel. Yeah. And Wildlife, Paul Dano's only directing and writing credit, starring Jake Gyllenhaal and Carey Mulligan. And that was sort of a more tempered and slow drama, but really, really well made. And I gave that 4 out of 5.
Yeah. So, thank you, Zach.
Time for more Rammstein?
No.
All right.
We're done for now.
Okay.
We'll wait another few years when they're hobbling up on stage making their next album that's actually a banger. So I was in a very weird world last week. And it was called Evil Dead 3: Doctor Strange in the Weird Worlds. I can't even talk.
Yes.
Just to say, I will not spoil this. Okay, no spoilers. All right.
Okay.
It's easy not to say anything, but this is Evil Dead 3. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
This is Sam Raimi. Just he's a crazy boy, and the problem with this film is that Kevin over there at Marvel Studios doesn't let Sam Raimi make Evil Dead 3. I'm just kidding. The issue with this is that there are two competing interests. There's the competing interests of the MCU and the competing interests of Sam Raimi and his epic personal opinion. And that is the integral issue. And I feel like a lot of reviewers I've seen have also kind of said the same thing, especially Raimi fanboys. And it is a good film, and a lot of the references that are literally direct references to Sam Raimi's directing style in Spider-Man, even Drag Me to Hell, and obviously Evil Dead, they feel like they belong in the universe for sure. But when it comes to like pacing and certain scenes that kind of just feel out of place, it feels like either Marvel or Sam wanted to be like, no, I have to have this scene in here, so we're going to put it in here because it's XYZ, or it adds to Doctor Strange's character, or it forwards the story with Scarlet Witch and everything. And the story here is great. Scarlet Witch is awesome. This is Elizabeth Olsen's probably best, and I saw all of WandaVision, and I feel like this is her best role in my opinion. Her best Scarlet Witch. And I also feel like this is Benedict Cumberbatch's best as well. And I really enjoy the writing, and the I don't know how this is PG-13, but there's the same thing with Drag Me to Hell. I don't know how that was PG-13. And it really pushes the boundaries in a lot of ways. I think it's going to disappoint a lot of people that are like really big Doctor Strange fans. And I think it'll make a lot of Sam Raimi fans happy, but there's just inconsistencies here and there that just feel very like there's like a tug of war in the production, and it's pretty irrefutable in my opinion. But for the most part, I feel like it's a really refreshing addition to the MCU. I feel like in general it does service to Doctor Strange's character and that universe, and I definitely want to see if there's going to be a collaboration later on and see how that turns out. So I gave it a 3.5 out of 5.
Okay.
I'm so nervous.
now, without giving anything away, there's one question I need you to answer for me.
Okay, I will. Is
the car in the movie?
Is it in the movie?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
For like half a second.
I will check out.
I saw.
I will check out Mr. Odd and the Unusual Place just for that. Okay. Well, since I last recorded with you guys, I've watched a few things. I finally finished my Anderson rewatch and watched Licorice Pizza. But that's not what I'm talking about today.
Let's go.
Because I also continued my Hitchcock marathon and watched Hitchcock's third movie, The Farmer's Wife. And so I'm talking about that today. So this is another early Hitchcock film like The Ring, which I talked about last time, which is very rough around the edges. Now, what I will say is that the cinematography in this is really cool, especially for an early silent movie. This is 1928, which I guess doesn't make it all that early of a silent movie after all, but it is a silent, it's early cinema, and there's some really cool, like, on-location film work in this that looks very, very nice, very crisp, very well exposed. Doesn't suffer from the really iffy, grainy footage that a lot of silent movies do when they go on location. And the dramatic elements of this, which are about... the film is basically about this farmer, his wife dies, he marries off his daughter, and then he's trying to find somebody else to marry so that he's not alone on this farm for the rest of his life in the wake of his wife's death. And there's dramatic moments at the beginning and the end, which actually work really well, which are about this man sort of being lonely and trying to find somebody new after the death of this person that he lived with for so long. But there's a good middle chunk where this is trying to be like a comedy, and it's trying to be like a much more lighthearted film, where it's kind of frankly unbearable. It has that issue that a lot of early slapstick humor does, where one joke is going to last us 10 minutes. If Nana's wheelchair doesn't get through the door, by golly, that it better be a knee slapper because it's going to be on screen for 15 minutes in the same shot, and every character in the movie is going to try to get her through the door, and every character in the movie is going to fail, and then a cat is going to fall into a pie or something, and you get some definite points where you're like, let's just move on, please. But for the dramatic stuff and for the pretty good camera work and performances, I gave this a 3. It's very middling, but it's okay, and it's better than a lot of earlier silent Hitchcock. That being said, it's time to move on to our next segment. This is a first for Season 3. This is the return of Mitchell's Munitions Minute. Mitchell has a minute to talk about firearms and munitions in A Fistful of Dollars. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Do you have to put me on the timer?
Oh my goodness, I forgot about this.
Should I do it?
It's a munitions minute. Otherwise, then I'm just going to keep shooting forever.
It is.
You ready?
All right.
3, 2, 1, go.
All right.
So there's a lot of Winchesters and single-action armies in this. There's way too many of them for me to count. So I'm going to focus on the single-action army. It's a 5.5-inch barrel. It's the artillery version. So the single-action army is actually one of the most revolutionary revolvers of all time. It's also the most iconic Western revolver ever. It uses metallic cartridges, and it was one of the main productions for the U.S. military that was replacing the cap and ball revolvers that were mostly used in the Civil War. So in the late 1800s, the single-action army, it's single action because you pull the hammer down, you pull the hammer back manually and then fire to release the hammer. And then you can also hold the trigger down and pull the hammer, so the hammer's hitting the rimfire cartridges and igniting the cartridges to have the bullets come out. So there you go. Also the Winchester, I think it's 1864 or 74. That's also a very popular one of the most well-known repeaters in
Bring.
I don't mean to extend the minute here, but I did want to ask you, Mitchell, about the Gatling gun that's used in the River Massacre sequence.
For some reason, I knew you were going to ask me about that. I have no idea how, but I knew you were going to ask me.
Why does it have all those holes in the front? I thought you only needed one barrel for a Gatling gun.
So it's a fake gun.
Oh, okay.
But it's based off of a real gun, a mitrailleuse. It's like a mixture of a Maxim gun and a mitrailleuse gun. I don't really know why there's so many barrels in the front. I feel like it was kind of just a stylistic choice to have it that way. But yeah, it's a combination of two different guns in real life. But yeah, the multiple barrels was kind of a very common thing for a long time. There's actually a duck foot gun. I'm trying not to get too much into this, but there's
the one that fans out, right?
Yeah, and it has multiple barrels because the revolving I should say the chain that is used for later machine guns is not developed yet. So that's probably the reason why there's multiple chambers. Christian is showing his Snoopy with sunglasses watch to indicate we should stop talking.
Yes. So excellent segment, but
yes. I think we get some real information out of this segment every time. I'm glad we came up with this.
Definitely.
So now it's time to move on to our other recent segment, the Marvelous Cinema Tour. I'm making my way through the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and today we're talking about the second film in the universe. And also the only one made with Universal Studios, The Incredible Hulk.
So Frankenstein shows up.
Yeah, boy, what a sophomore slump. I don't dislike this movie as much as other people do. I think there's some interesting stuff in it. Well, I shouldn't say interesting. There's some fun stuff in it. I came very close to reviewing this movie as giving the Hulk his own movie is a lot like trying to give Ringo Starr a solo career. He's fun as part of a group, but on his own, all he knows how to do is hit things and make loud noises.
Oh my god! That's so mean.
I decided not to because I thought it was a little too harsh to Ringo, but I do think there's some truth there. The Hulk is just not a very interesting character because there's so little to him. He is either Bruce Banner, who is not a very interesting person, or he's a big angry green thing that can't communicate with other people, and so all he can really do is hit things, and that stops it doesn't stop the action dead, but it stops the progress of the script dead. I think the most interesting bit of this entire movie is the first act, which is like a cool little 45-minute Hulk short film almost. If this ended right after the factory chase, where we kind of see the Hulk for the first time. Bruce hulks out for the first time and causes a bunch of destruction, and then he vanishes into the jungle. It would be decent. I would have thought it was like okay and made a nice little short film, but then there's 2 hours after that are just really uninteresting. Apparently, Tim Blake Nelson shows up at the end of this movie. I forget his character's name, but like a bit of Bruce's blood like gets into a cut, and it like his head bulges weirdly, and then he never shows up in the movies again. Apparently, he was meant to come back as the leader, who is apparently the Hulk's like arch nemesis.
Oh,
and
that
he's,
would have
like,
been so much better.
Super
than
intelligent. I think having the leader in this first film would have been so much more interesting than Abomination. Because then you could have some kind of a contrast of like this super intelligent character against Muscle, and there's some kind of contrast there. But as it is, you have the Abomination, who is a big brown thing that hits things, and you have the Hulk, which is a big green thing that hits things.
He's like the Hulk, but he's not like the Hulk.
I was gonna say, so Zach, you're saying the movie could have been a leader instead of an Abomination.
This is true. This is very true. But yeah, the climax of this movie is just 2 pieces of pixely meat slapping into each other, and it's very uninteresting. So 2 out of 5 from me. Next up is Iron Man 2, which I remember finding pretty boring when I saw it as a kid, but I have not seen it.
Elon Musk.
Unnecessary level of hate, in my opinion.
I haven't seen it since I was like 9, so I think there's a chance I enjoy this one a lot more than I did when I was a kid. But that being said, 2 out of 5 for the Hulk, and it's time to move on to our classic and oldest segment, The Rundown.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can't say it anymore.
Yeah. So, if you missed our Finding Nemo episode, go listen to that. What the heck are you doing? But what we're doing this season is quizzing Mitchell instead of quizzing Zach, because we got bored. Alrighty. I'm trying to remember whether Zach's supposed to start this one or if I am. I'm going to start this one. Okay.
I'm training.
1 minute. Mitchell, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Filming without sound.
2 out of 5.
Dubbing.
3 out of 5.
Sergio Leone.
4 out of 5.
Bebe Jesus.
4 out of 5.
Ennio Morricone's score.
5 out of 5.
Horses.
4 out of 5.
Clint Eastwood's poncho.
4 out of 5.
Saloon.
3 out of 5.
Akira Kurosawa writing credit.
4 out of 5.
I want to see her.
5 out of 5.
Shades of red and brown composing all of the color.
4 out of 5.
When a man with a 45 meets a man with a rifle.
5 out of 5.
Hammer blasting.
5 out of 5.
Barrel rolls.
4 out of 5.
Maniacal laughter.
3 out of 5.
Literal plot armor.
3 out of 5.
Serving as inspiration to The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett.
2 out of 5.
Moral
4 seconds.
relativism.
4 out of 5.
Excellent. With a second to spare.
Very excellent.
Get your Mandalorian out of this place. What the heck
Is
wrong with
this
you?
really all that influential on Book of Boba Fett? I heard that kind of went in a different direction. Okay.
Well, I think they mentioned the good, the bad, and the ugly more, but no, absolutely. And when you mentioned Iron Man, like, Favreau is totally tuned in to, like, Kurosawa and Leone and, like, everything that George Lucas was tuned into. He's very conscious about, like, bringing those visuals and aesthetics back. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, that brings us to an end. Brings us to the end of episode 2 of season 3. But it's time to preview our next episode. Mitchell, what are we watching and talking about next time?
Michael Bay. Except there's Ben Affleck and Kate Beckinsale.
Oh,
no. Pearl Harbor, 2001. Oh my lord. See, if you have respect for World War II history, this is essential. Okay? To any historian that has to analyze this and understand this is a piece of artistic extravagance and magnificence. Okay? Obviously. So we're going to discuss how magnificent it is in our next episode.
All right. You know how they sell those Neapolitan ice creams that are like 3 different flavors?
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor sounds like Neapolitan ice cream, but it's every variety of crap. And
I just need a break from Ben Affleck, man.
On that bombshell, it's time to end. Thank you so much for
Bombshell.
joining us. We'll see you next time. Good night.